Her finger trembled as she pointed towards the edge of my lawn, but her voice was pure ice. "By the end of the month," she hissed, "we will be reclaiming this section. We're adjusting the community boundaries." She was Marlene Draper, my HOA president, and she clearly thought her title gave her the power of a queen. She figured she could bully me, fine me, and harass me until she could literally force a sale or take a piece of my property for her family's benefit. But she had no idea that the thick manila envelope in my hand, the one that felt like a lead weight, held the proof that was about to bring her entire, petty kingdom crashing down. If that sounds nuts, you have no idea. This is a story about what happens when you decide to fight back against a power-tripping HOA president who's gone way too far. You're going to want to take notes. It all started with my dream house, a modest, 3-bedroom place in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Valley Ridge. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. The best part? The quarter-acre of land it sat on. I had visions of a huge garden, a small workshop for my woodworking hobby, and a safe place for my dog to run. The neighborhood seemed perfect. I knew there was an HOA, the Valley Ridge Association, but it seemed like a formality to keep the community looking nice. Then I met Marlene Draper. She introduced herself that first weekend, clipboard in hand, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was the president of the association, she announced, as if I should be impressed. The first chat was fine, just a simple welcome. But a week later, the first notice appeared. A crisp white envelope in my mail slot. It was a warning. My fence, a classic white picket fence that was here when I bought the house, was not in keeping with the modern aesthetic of the community. No fine, not yet. Just a warning. A few weeks after that, Marlene paid me a visit. She was looking over my property with this weirdly critical eye. "You know," she said, her tone a little too casual, "my brother has been looking for a place with a bit more space. He'd be a great fit for the community." The comment was so bizarre and out of left field that I just stared at her. It was the first chilling sign that this was never about a fence. It was about my land. Soon, the warnings turned into fines. It started small. A $50 fine because my garbage can was visible from the street an hour after pickup. Then $100 for unapproved perennial colors in my flower bed. I tried to be a good neighbor. I moved the cans, I even replanted some flowers. But it was like trying to fight a fire with a squirt gun. Her attacks quickly zeroed in on the land she seemed to want. She hit me with a $200 fine because my patio furniture, a simple wicker set, was supposedly resort style. Then came a notice that my small workshop, hidden behind the garage and totally invisible from the street, violated a non-existent rule about auxiliary structures. The fines were piling up, and each one was more ridiculous than the last. The final straw was a massive $500 fine for a small oil spot on my own driveway, which she called an environmental hazard. I tried to reason with her. I printed out the official HOA bylaws and highlighted the sections on approved structures and decor. I showed her in black and white that none of her claims were backed up by the rules we'd all agreed to. She just waved her hand. "The bylaws are a guideline," she said with a smirk. "As president, my interpretation is what matters. The board trusts my judgment." That's when I knew for sure this wasn't about rules. This was a calculated campaign of selective enforcement and administrative harassment, designed to either bury me in fines or frustrate me into selling. She wanted my home, and she was abusing her position to try and get it. I couldn't fight her on her terms because she just kept making up new ones. So I started playing by my own. First, I got a certified copy of the complete HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&RS. I read every single word until I knew them better than she did. I created a detailed log of every interaction, every fine, every threat. You have to document everything in these situations. Next, I invested in a couple of high-quality security cameras. They weren't just for security. They were for evidence. And oh, they delivered. I captured footage of Marlene trespassing on my property while I was at work, tape measure in hand, pointing out sections of my yard to a man I later confirmed was her brother. She was literally measuring out the piece of my yard she planned to take over. Armed with this, I started talking to my neighbors. At first, they were scared. They'd seen the violation notices piling up on my door and didn't want to be her next target. But when I shared my story and showed them the camera footage, the floodgates opened. One family had been fined hundreds because their kid's swing set was cedar instead of redwood. An elderly woman was being threatened with liens over the color of her welcome mat. We all realized her harassment was personal and targeted. This wasn't just my fight anymore, it was for our whole community. The final piece of the puzzle, the smoking gun, came from a public records request. As a member, I had the right to see the HOA's financial statements. I requested the last 3 years of records, and what I found was shocking. The thousands of dollars from all these bogus fines weren't going toward community improvements. Instead, there were huge invoices for landscaping services from a company owned by Marlene's brother-in-law and consulting fees paid directly to her family. She wasn't just a bully. She was using the HOA as her personal ATM. With a mountain of evidence and a dozen angry neighbors, we used a clause in the HOA bylaws to call a special meeting. The official purpose was to discuss the conduct of the board and the financial state of the association. Marlene showed up looking smug, flanked by her 2 loyal board members. She thought the meeting was to publicly shame me. The community hall was packed. You could feel the tension in the air. Marlene opened with a speech about rules and property values. Then, she turned the floor over to me with a smirk, clearly expecting me to beg. I walked to the podium, placed my thick manila envelope on it, and calmly began. "Good evening, everyone," I started, looking right at Marlene. "For the last 6 months, I have been the subject of a targeted harassment campaign by our president." A murmur went through the room. I calmly laid out every single fine, and for each one, I read the section of the bylaws that proved it was baseless. Then I turned to the crowd. "And I'm not the only one, am I?" That was the cue. One by one, my neighbors stood up. The young father talked about the swing set. The elderly woman talked about her welcome mat. Story after story of petty tyranny and abuse of power filled the room. Marlene's smug expression slowly melted into pure panic. Then the finale. I projected the security camera footage onto the wall. The whole neighborhood watched as Marlene and her brother trespassed on my property, plotting. Her face went ghost white. Finally, I held up the financial statements. "And where did the money from all these illegal fines go?" I asked the room. I showed them the invoices to her family, the crooked payments, the total lack of any real community work. The room absolutely erupted. According to Article 12, Section 4 of our own bylaws, I said, my voice ringing out, any officer can be removed for cause, including abuse of power, by a majority vote of the members. I looked at the sea of angry faces. I moved to remove Marlene Draper from the office of president, effective immediately. The vote was a landslide. Hands shot up all over the room. Marlene was speechless, utterly defeated, and voted outright then and there. Her cronies on the board resigned the next day. The feeling in that room was pure relief. We had taken our community back. The new board immediately voided every fine Marlene had ever issued and launched a formal audit. She is now facing a lawsuit from the association to recover the funds she misappropriated. The best part isn't just winning, though. It's the change in Valley Ridge. People are talking again. Kids are playing in the yards. The neighborhood feels alive, free from that cloud of petty tyranny. It turns out, standing up to a bully doesn't just solve your problem, it can bring a whole community together. The key is to know your rights, document everything, and remember that you're never as alone as a bully wants you to feel. Have you ever had a nightmare neighbor or an HOA from hell? Share your story in the comments. Your experience could help someone else going through the same thing.